take thumbnail pictures at the beginning of videos, and every time I film a statistics video, I think, man, I don't have anything to hold up that represents statistics. Like, there aren't any books to hold up. It's very strange. So super boring thumbnails every time. But yeah, it's time for statistics again. Like last time, I'm going to compare this quarter with the previous quarter so you can see any fluctuations or any things that have stayed steady throughout the year. So to start off with, I have read 79 works by 67 unique authors or editors in July, August, and September. This is up ever so slightly from the 74 works by 66 authors that I read in the previous quarter. The gender breakdown is more interesting this time because I made a pointed effort to pick up more books by women. And so of the 67 unique authors or editors, 20 were men, which is down significantly from 33 in the second quarter. 40 were women, which is up significantly from 28 in the second quarter, and 7 were both, and these were usually editing teams like the Thomases who edit Uncanny Magazine. I'm definitely happy that I read so many books by women in this past quarter. I didn't intend to overcorrect that much, but it's nice to know that I can do it if I need to. For sources, or where I get the books that I read, I am still only tracking one comparison, which is free sources versus paid sources. In the third quarter, my free sources were borrowed from other people, interlibrary loan, local libraries, NetGalley, publishers, Overdrive, and websites, and this accounted for 45 of the 79 works I read, which was 57%. Paid sources were my Audible subscription, books that I own and paid for, and subscriptions, and this accounted for 34 of the 79 that I read, or 43%. Now, in the second quarter, my breakdown here was 50-50 exactly, and that is actually my goal. I would like to have a good balance between reading the things that I have paid for, that I have on hand, and seeking out things from free sources so that I'm not buying everything, because I can't afford to buy everything. So I'm slightly weighed in favor of free sources in this last quarter, and I'm hoping that by the end of the year, my yearly statistic will be very close to that 50-50 breakdown. And now onto genres, which is probably the thing that most of you are here for. I read 19 science fiction novels, 13 nonfiction books, which was up from 9 in the previous quarter, 11 magazine issues, which was up from 2 or 3, I think. 10 comics, which was down from, I think, 15 in the previous quarter. I read 5 fantasy novels, 5 novellas, 4 books that I classified as literary fiction, though some people may disagree with me on those categorizations. And I read 12 other books from memoir collections, middle grade, mystery, drama, poetry, and steampunk. Anything that I read 3 or fewer books in, I lump into another category just for the sake of it right now. There are 2 things in this genre category that I want to talk about because they've really surprised me. The first is that my nonfiction reading has increased, noticeably so. In 2016, I read 23 nonfiction books, but by the end of the third quarter this year, I had already read 28. So I'm going to really exceed last year's number this year. And I guess I can't be surprised that I have been reading nonfiction because I have noticed that I have been enjoying it a lot. I've gotten the yen to read a lot of nonfiction this year, and I've really enjoyed what I've been reading. I've sought out more and more of it, but I guess I never really thought of myself as a nonfiction reader, but the fact is it's becoming a larger and larger percentage of what I read, so I may have to rethink how I think about myself. The other thing is that my fantasy reading has plummeted. In 2016, I read a total of 48 fantasy novels, but so far this year I've only read about 19, like half of what I read last year, and I don't see this number going up that much either. I really don't know what's going on here other than, once again, my tastes might be shifting. but also it seems like a lot of the really popular fantasy I just don't care for anymore. I know that I kind of fell out of love with the epic high fantasy a couple of years ago, and I don't seem to have found a type of fantasy, a subgenre of fantasy that I've really gravitated towards since then. I've read some urban fantasy, I've read even some supernatural fantasy and odds and ends here and there, but I'm not really sure what I like in fantasy right now. I'm not really in a rush to correct this. I'm perfectly fine prioritizing science fiction over fantasy, but I think this is interesting to point out for people who may think that I read a lot of fantasy, since I am part of BookTube SFF here on BookTube, which is really weighed in favor of fantasy most of the time, but I seem to be one of those people who really reads more science fiction than fantasy these days. So the other two things that I have to talk about that I talk about in every stats video are my 2 annual goals. My first one is that I want to maintain a 10% in translation rate, and year to date, by the end of the third quarter, that number was at 9.86% for me. This dipped a little bit. I was really good at being smack dab 10%, but I didn't read any translated fiction in August for some reason, and so I have to read maybe 2 or 3 extra books now to catch up, maybe even less than that. So still very doable. I'm still having a lot of fun reading translated works, and I expect I will meet this goal by the end of the year. The other one is that I want to minimize my reading of US authors. I'm hoping to keep the books that I read under 60% from the US. So I'm counting books, not authors necessarily. And at the end of the third quarter, 56 of the books that I had read were written by US authors. This number has been creeping up a little bit throughout the year, probably inflated by the number of magazine issues that I've been reading because they're all edited by Americans. And I've been reading a lot of them, but it's still below my 60% target, so I'm still pretty happy with this. I do think I'm gonna have to pay a little bit more attention to it in the remainder of the year. Since I will be reading a lot of short fiction, I'm going to have to offset all of those US editors with non-American editors or authors. We'll see if I can do that. And the final thing to note is that I have picked up my short fiction reading again in the third quarter. I got back into reading it big time in September. I did a massive wrap up of my favorite short fiction from September if you want to go watch that. And I expect that the remainder of the year I will still continue to read a lot of short stories, so a lot more magazines and editors will be appearing in my statistics. I still don't know how I really want to handle that data because it can really skew things. Some people left me some really great comments about how they handle tracking their short fiction reading, and I will be definitely going back to those comments and figuring something out at the end of the year. Frankly, I just haven't taken the time to figure it out and muck around in my spreadsheets that much, but that is what holiday vacation time is for. So that is it for my third quarter statistics and what I've been reading. Hopefully you found this rather interesting. If you have any statistics of your own that you want to share, please comment down below and let me know and other people know. And I will talk to you again in my next video. And until then, bye.